first to see if the policy will work.
There must be an ample services that will be provided for the unvaccinated. It does not mean kasi po na if you exercise your authority to protect the general public, it does not mean that you have naman to prejudice the rights of another sector. You do not have to sacrifice, but you have to provide a remedy for them also to exercise their right.
For commuter group Pasada, some may choose to take unauthorized vehicles instead. Pasada urges transport officials to intensify its crackdown on colorum vehicles for the safety of commuters. But some lawmakers also hitting the brakes on the no vaccine, no ride policy. The Transportation Department reiterates that tighter movement restrictions will protect both vaccinated and non-vaccinated people. The DOTR apologizes for any convenience or inconvenience it may cause, but insists the policy has its benefits. The agency also wants to prevent another possible public transport shutdown. Last year, major rail lines suspended trips after a spike in cases among train workers. The Health Department yet again issuing new guidelines for testing, quarantine, and isolation. Our Caroline Bonkin breaks down for us.
Your vaccination status will now determine the length of your isolation period once you test positive for COVID-19. Based on the Health Department's proposed guidelines, fully vaccinated individuals who have mild or no symptoms will only be required to isolate for 7 days. The count starts on the first day of symptoms. But if asymptomatic, day 1 starts on the testing date. If partially vaccinated or unvaccinated, isolating date. If partially vaccinated or unvaccinated, isolation period remains at 10 days. But those with moderate symptoms will be required to isolate for 10 days, regardless of vaccination status, and 21 days for severe and critical cases. For fully vaccinated close contacts, quarantine is cut to 5 days, but they have to monitor themselves for symptoms, while the quarantine period for unvaccinated or partially vaccinated close contacts remains at 14 days.
Evidence review of our living CPG also shows that the average duration of infectivity and secondary attack are relatively lower for vaccinated than those unvaccinated individuals. Vaccinated individuals had lower chances of spreading the virus within their household and close contacts. Vaccinated asymptomatic and mild cases are unlikely to shed infectious virus 10 days after the diagnosis or symptom onset.
An even shorter quarantine period of only 5 days is required from asymptomatic fully vaccinated health workers exposed to COVID patients, and if needed, may even be cut if the health worker has a booster shot, subject to IATF approval.
This shall also be expanded to other sectors with strict industry standards on infection prevention and control, subject to the IATF approval. For example, we have ongoing discussions with the aviation sector.
For COVID-19 testing, priority are senior citizens, persons with comorbidities, and health workers.
This is because those above 60 years old or with comorbidity can be provided with different medicines or antivirals within the first 5 days of their symptoms.
We prioritize, given the limitations of our testing capacity at the moment, we will prioritize those who will benefit from the testing.
A COVID-19 test is optional for asymptomatic close contacts, but they have to monitor themselves for symptoms. If they need to be tested, this should be done on the 5th day from exposure. Caroline Bonkin, CNN Philippines.
The Pandemic Response Task Force raising the alert level status in 28 more areas. We're showing you the list. These places will be under alert level 3 beginning Friday, January 14th. That's tomorrow until the end of the month. This covers more than a dozen provinces in Luzon, 7 cities and provinces in the Visayas, and 5 cities in Mindanao. Today, officials are also sitting down to determine the next steps for Metro Manila, which is at critical risk because of the Omicron surge. Let's bring in our Malacanang correspondent, Trisha Terada. Trisha, did the government heed the recommendation of Metro Manila mayors to maintain the status quo?
Hopefully, we are still keeping tabs of that closed door meeting. What we know so far is Metro Manila's alert level for the rest of the month is among the top agenda, including the status of other areas at high risk. The task force also discussed the risk classification of countries that will be the basis for arrival protocols for passengers entering the Philippines. In the most recent health briefing, we were told that part of the cost to set healthcare package for COVID positive individuals who are isolated at home. But we have yet to get a confirmation that this was actually addressed today. Yeah.
Trisha, what is the possibility of seeing Metro Manila back to alert level 4, the second highest alert level?
Well, the officials are now looking to several factors aside from the case count and the speed of virus transmission. As earlier reported, Metro Manila mayors do not see the need to escalate the alert level just yet. Because the city mayor Joy De Monte says even if the numbers are high, the healthcare utilization rate has not yet reached the threshold. The mayor is also considering the economic impact of raising alert level 4 because this means more operational capacity among businesses. Based on the observation of Metro Manila mayors, along with the World Health Organization's view, alert level 3 has visibly helped in reducing mobility. The WHO says this is important in managing the transmission of the virus. Over to you, Pia.
How would authorities assess the situation of our healthcare system?
Well, the one hospital command chief and health secretary, undersecretary Leopoldo Vega says the situation is manageable so far, even if they're receiving an average of 1,120 calls during this surge. He says most of these do not require ICU care.
September of last year, ang number of calls namin ay talagang referrals and sa mga hospitals for intensive care units, especially yung yung nakakaproblema din in terms of the distribution of oxygen supply at the time. So yun ang ating nakita noong September. Ito ngayon January, nakita natin na yung mga tawag mostly on the isolation facilities, home isolations, at saka kukonti na yung referrals namin nasa mga 15% yung referrals namin for the hospitals and for intensive care unit services.
Based on the DOH data, Vega says more than 3,000 healthcare workers are currently in isolation. To address this, he says some hospitals are suspending elective surgeries and other non-COVID services to deploy health workers to care for COVID patients. Back to you, Pia.
Yeah, Trisha, there is data that suggests vaccination rates in provinces are quite low. What is the government doing to make sure that infection will not spread to these provinces? Because it's happened before, no? Once the surge dies down here in Metro Manila, doon naman sa probinsya nagkakaroon ng problema.
That's right, Pia, but at this point, the specifics aren't very clear yet, except that the national government has been urging LGUs to ramp up their vaccination efforts and targets. On Wednesday, the IATF also placed 28 areas outside Metro Manila under Alert Level 3. Malacanang and DOH have also announced that they're allocating more beds for COVID cases. But at this point, we have yet to hear from authorities about how prepared are hospitals and the healthcare facilities outside of the NCR. Back to you, Pia.
Trisha Terada there reporting. Manila, the city of Manila, declaring a one-week health break for public and private schools at all levels amid the spike in COVID-19 cases. Mayor Isko Moreno saying online and physical classes will be suspended beginning January 14th, tomorrow, to the 21st. And this just in, Moreno also issuing a show cause order to the University of the East Manila for its reported refusal to carry out this directive. The city also banning physical activities and mass gatherings during the feast of the Santo Niño on Sunday. Apart from religious processions, street parties, drinking, and selling of liquor are prohibited. City government is extending its drive-through vaccination site at the Quirino Grandstand to 24 hours because of high demand. Coming up on Newsnight, more the government's new coronavirus testing rules as undermanned laboratories appeal for understanding over delayed results. Plus, we dig deeper into how Vice President and presidential aspirant Leni Robredo plans to address the health crisis and more. We'll get up close with her right here on CNN Philippines. Stay tuned.
Libre ko San Miguel. Panalo Pro. 100 million pesos in GCash prizes. Buy any San Miguel beer. Hanapin ang code sa Crown. Kung meron, panalo ka. Iscan ang QR code sa mga posters at Facebook. I-type ang code and win! Sali na! Available in areas where allowed. See posters for full details. Promo runs from September 1 to December 31, 2021. Per DOH FDA CFR permit number 0424 series of 2021. Drink responsibly.
Ringo Honasan po. Sa pagbangon ng mga Pilipino, saludo ako sa mga taong patuloy na humaharap sa hamon ng pagbabago. Sa panahon ng krisis, ikaw, ako, magtulungan tayo. Ringo Honasan po. Saludo ako sa Pilipino.
Welcome back to Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines. I'm Pia Ontiveros. The government recalibrating its testing strategy to address backlogs and delays in releasing test results because of limited manpower in laboratories. Medical technologists and laboratory workers feel the brunt of the COVID-19 surge, including incidents of harassment from those disappointed over delayed results. More from Tristan Nadalo.
It feels like 2020 again for medical technologist Aljo Hernandez and his colleagues from a clinical laboratory in Quezon City, with the influx of patients wanting to get tested for COVID-19 and the overwhelming workload due to limited manpower. We spoke to him after his 16-hour shift.
Na-degrade na kami, binumura kami, sinisigawan. So, ang hinihingi lang nga namin, unawain nyo kami. Kasi kung kayo may sakit, kami rin nagkakasakit, kulang kami sa manpower, napapagod din kami, napapuyat kami, kulang kami sa tulog.
While they are doing their best, he appeals for understanding as many health workers are stretched to the limit.
Minumura nyo mga health workers, sinisigawan, kahit over the phone, face-to-face, hindi nyo alam, kulang pa yan sa tulog, hindi pa yan nakainom ng tubig, hindi pa yan bathroom break.
Echoing Aljo's statement is former lab manager of the Lord's Grace Medical and Industrial Clinic. He says due to the surge, they now work beyond capacity.
Please be patient with your results. We are assuring that your samples are being processed with quality. The healthcare workers right now are so tired, they're so overworked, and sorry to say, they're underpaid.
Even big laboratories manned by Philippine Red Cross personnel experienced delay in results due to manpower issues. Speaking to CNN Philippines, Philippine Red Cross Chairman Senator Richard Gordon says they even send samples outside Metro Manila to process the results.
They'll have to be patient because mahirap naman magkasakit lahat. Kung magkasakit lahat, di lalong wala na magtetest. Masyadong entitlement natin kung siya. All labs are overwhelmed. Some have closed down, in fact, private labs.
To address the testing backlog, the Health Department issued an updated guidelines on COVID-19 testing. Healthcare workers, senior citizens, and persons with comorbidities are the priority groups for testing. Those not part of these groups but exposed to infected people only need to isolate and quarantine as soon as possible.
Because of limited testing, and also because some of our laboratory technicians are either in isolation or quarantine, so the testing output or capacity is reduced because of these circumstances.
The Health Department reports an average of 50 to 70,000 tests on a daily basis amid the ongoing surge. Tristan Nadalo, CNN Philippines.
At least 32 inter-island passengers who arrived at the Zamboanga City port last night tested positive for COVID-19 after undergoing rapid antigen tests. They're set to undergo confirmatory RT-PCR tests today. The COVID-positive individuals were among the 613 passengers on board the SMA to-go vessel that sailed from Manila to Dumaguete City. A total of 245 passengers were tested as part of the requirements for inbound travelers coming from high-risk areas. A Nobel Peace Prize 2021 winner wants to put a stop to disinformation on social media by penalizing the firms behind these platforms. Stanley Gaheta tells us more.
Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa wants to have a law that will hold Facebook, YouTube, and other social media platforms accountable when it comes to spreading disinformation online. At a Senate hearing on Wednesday, the Rappler CEO says the accountability should not only be on those who post wrong information, but also on companies behind the online platform as well.
In the United States, part of the reason that the social media platforms, that the tech platforms are able to move forward without any accountability or liability for content for information operations is because there's a law in 1996 that was passed, and the Section 230 gives them cover. But in the Philippines, we actually don't.
Reza believes social media has been used to distort the facts and that social media owners should be responsible in regulating online behavior.
Disinformation works like cocaine, he said. If you sniff once or twice, it may not change your life. If you use it every day, it will make you into an addict, a different man.
The Senate panel also suggests the removal of ad placement of companies on video spewing lies and false information to prevent them from earning from it.
Part of the infrastructure and is that based on the data that we have initially received, and we'd like this confirmed, about 27 billion pesos worth of digital ads were spent last year. So that's 27 billion pesos worth of ads going into all these various digital platforms.
Facebook is now the world's largest distributor of news, and yet studies have shown that lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further than the really boring facts.
Meta, the company behind Facebook and Instagram, and the Department of Justice agreed that there should be stricter rules covering social media ethics.
And we are here to partner with you on crafting legislation like that to the extent that we're still welcome to do so.
I do acknowledge what you've mentioned on having more specific accountability, and we will do our due diligence.
Reza believes strong rules should be implemented as soon as possible to avoid influencing more people like the voters in the coming elections. Stanley Guedes, CNN Philippines.
Still ahead on Newsnight, Vice President Leni Robredo pushes for a different approach to ending the health crisis, the war on drugs, and more. She joins us for an up-close conversation next. We also have the latest in music, details on Adele's newest release, and the artists that will headline this year's Coachella when we return.
Lauren nangangailangan. Free college education law.
Para sa aming edukasyon.
MSME law.
Batas para sa aming kabuhayan.
Climate Change Act.
Mga batas para sa kalikasan at climate change.
Mga batas na ginawa ko na napapakinabangan ngayon. Sana makatulong pa ako sa mas marami.
Lauren Legarda.
This is a paid advertisement.
Ringo Honasan po. Sa pagbangon ng mga Pilipino, saludo ako sa mga taong patuloy sa
bilang sundalo, tinatanggap
sa panahon
ng krisis, ikaw, ako, Ringo, saludo.
Welcome back to CNN Philippines. Cabinet and senior officials during the administration of former President Fidel Ramos backed Vice President Leni Robredo's presidential bid. The 23 former government officials said Robredo is the only presidential bet who embodies qualities of a leader who will bring out the best of servant leadership, inspire unity among Filipinos, and empower the country. Robredo says she's humbled by the endorsement and that she would work hard to be worthy of that trust. Meanwhile, Senator Manny Pacquiao says the government should conduct free mass testing to contain the pandemic, not resort to coercion. The statement comes amid planned restrictions on the unvaccinated. Senator Ping Lacson welcomes the National Privacy Commission's probe into the alleged hacking of Comlink servers. Lacson says he instructed his in-house security team to assist the NPC's investigation. The tandem of former Senator Bongbong Marcos and Davao City Mayor Sara Duterte Carpio is looking at modernizing the Pasig River ferry system as part of the team's mass transportation blueprint. And former Defense Secretary Norberto Gonzales vows to fight the supposed lies about Marcos's family and martial law. Gonzales, who's running for president under the Partido Democrático Socialista ng Pilipinas, says it's important to educate the youth about atrocities that happened under the rule of the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos.
Ang ginagawa nila ngayon, medyo nakaka-disturb na konti kasi binabago ang kasaysayan. Ipinapakita na ang nagkamali ay yung It's a People Power of 1986 instead of what they have done or what their father have done. I will not match that campaign. Hindi ko bibili ng kababayan natin. Hindi ko sila lolokohin. Hindi ko sila gagamitan ng maling propaganda.
Helping Filipinos navigate through a raging pandemic and now seeking answers from the Commission on Elections over an alleged data breach. Vice President Leni Robredo juggles her time to personally address these top-of-mind national concerns while making her case to the Filipino people to bid or in a bid for the highest position in the land come May 9th, 2022. We now have the Vice President herself for an up-close interview here on Newsnight. Good evening, ma'am, and thank you very much for joining us. Let's begin with this, the pandemic, of course, that is really top of mind. We understand that you don't like the or appreciate the government policy of no vaccination, no ride. As a matter of fact, you say what is important is to ramp up vaccination. What we need to do is to inform and incentivize. Can you explain more about that?
You know, Pia, we have been having Vaccine Express in many parts of the country. And from our experience, hindi kailangan takutan eh. From our experience, kailangan mo lang talagang tiyagaan to educate people. You have to make sure that yung vaccination accessible to them. And pangatlo, talagang to incentivize. I will give you a very specific example. We did the vaccination in Capas Tarlac for the Aita community. Before we went, we were already being warned that ayaw ng Aita community magpabakuna. Pero when we went, talagang we worked with the local government unit, sinundo sila, nagbigay kami ng mga food packs, nagbigay kami ng mga other incentives. And you know, the turnout was very, very good. And we have not just done that in Capas. But we have been doing that elsewhere. So para sa akin, dapat sana yung vaccination, hindi siya lalabas na paparusahan ka kung hindi ka bakunado. Pero talagang we go out of our way and exert our best effort to really educate, to really bring the vaccination where people are and provide incentives.
You brought up this issue about bringing the vaccination to people, no? And that is something I remember in late December when I interviewed Charlie Galvez, and he was saying that that could be a logistical challenge for the LGUs in lalo na sa far-flung areas. Can you talk about that?
Totoong logistical challenge siya, Pia, pero government should not do it alone. Our Vaccine Express initiatives, we were able to do a lot of things because we have been partnering with the private sector. Sa amin, Pia, hindi siya naging mahirap. Hindi siya naging mahirap because all our initiatives has really been a collaboration, not just between our office and the private sector, but also with the local government unit.
Okay. Ma'am, about was that a week or 2 weeks ago, I remember you were very upset with allegations on social media that one of your daughters had skipped or cut quarantine or something or other. And also, after Christmas, before New Year's, ang daming nagalit doon sa Poblacion Girl and yung isa pa, no? Pero nakasuhan din naman yung dalawa. The question here is, how should we move forward on something like this when there are, alleged blatant disregard for the rules? How do we appeal to Filipinos, to our citizens, to, parang integrity yan eh. Pwede na, integrity is what you do even when no one is looking, right?
Ito, Pia, dapat natuto tayo from the lessons na yung Poblacion Girl incident gave us. Nung sumabog yon, marami yung naglabasan. Apparently, it has been happening already. So gusto ko sabihin, may problema tayo sa implementation. Kasi yung protocols naman are in place. Kaya sa akin, Pia, kailangan we should have learned from that lesson kasi it was very costly for us. So yung sa akin, halimbawa, ito personal experience, Pia, na yung mga anak ko traveled from the US, dumating sila on the 20th, na-swab sila on the 24th, lumabas yung kanilang results on the 25th. Sa tatlo kong anak, isa yung nag-positive. So my daughter was telling me na tinawagan siya ng Bureau of Quarantine. The protocols were explained to her. Ang advice sa kanya, isolation facility. So klaro yung mga protocols. So after checking out of the hotel, she went straight to the isolation facility, and nung nasa isolation facility, meron mga protocols in place. She was still required to do home quarantine for another 6 days. So kung nasusunod lang sana ito, Pia, maayos lahat. Halimbawa yung sa anak ko, walang nahawa in the family, na-control yung spread of the virus. The main reason why nangyari yung Poblacion Girl incident, kasi may nagsiskip ng protocols na kung hindi sumabog, hindi ma-reveal yung mga gaps in the implementation.
Which is also why kinasuhan na nga several people and groups. No, but ma'am, my last question before we go to a break, if you were to win the election, what is the first thing you would do to address the pandemic on day 1, June 30? Minutes after taking your oath, for example, if you were to win.
Ako, Pia, talagang yung pinaka-first agenda is freedom from COVID. If we are able to control the transmission of the virus, it will set everything else in motion. So, eto yung first major step towards full recovery. And then we need to ensure the availability of jobs and livelihoods as we begin to make our way forward in the new normal. I think in mid-November, we put out our kalayaan sa COVID plan already. And in December, we put out our Hanap Buhay para sa lahat. It's available sa lennyrobredo.com. And yung sinasabi natin, the core principle of this plan is ensuring that progress is felt in the communities. And really, that begins with jobs. Yung kalayaan sa COVID, kabahagi doon yung getting the economy back on its feet, making sure that the healthcare system will be resilient moving forward, and yung education, grabe yung damage to the education of our children. 2 years na, Pia, 2 years na hindi talaga nakakapasok yung marami sa ating mga So talagang ito yung mga priorities natin.
And since elections na pinag-usapan, ma'am, let's jump from the pandemic to politics. But we're going to do that after taking this very short break. Keep it here on CNN Philippines. The year has just begun, but the Commission on Elections' hands are already full amid new developments 4 months before the 2022 elections. agenda. The final list of candidates to be announced this week, shrugging off the standard-bearer Les Duterte-led PDP Laban faction's request to reopen the filing of certificates of candidacy. Also on the table, the preliminary conference on the disqualification case filed by the Akbayan Party list against presidential aspirant and survey frontrunner Ferdinand Marcos Jr. With COMELEC Chairman Sheriff Abbas and 2 commissioners stepping down next month and the recent rise in COVID-19 cases again stoking fears, what should Filipinos expect come May 2022? Good evening. Political movement fix, politics as usual. We apologize for coming in a little bit technical difficulty, but anyway. We open yung filing ng COC that happened last October, first week of October, October 1 to 8. Pagbibigyan pa yan ba? Pagbibigyan ba yan ng COMELEC?
Sorry about that. Good evening, Pia, again. Medyo unlikely na mapagbigyan yan, ano? Kasi masyadong maraming konsekwensya yung pagpapa-reopen ng ating filing ng COC. Remember, just apart from the fact na ang haba-haba na ng binigay na period for filing COCs, kung uulitin mo yan ngayon, hindi naman isang partido lang ang magte-take advantage niyan eh. Lahat. So basically, yung buong October 1 to 8, parang inulit mo na rin. Which also means, lahat ng screening na ginawa natin from October 8 up to this point, parang baliwala. Kasi magkakaroon ka ng panibagong mga aplikante, bagong filing eh. So, ang daming epekto niyan, no? Down the road. Sabi nga ng mismong petition, humihingi din sila ng postponement ng filing ng balota. And that would probably be a logical conclusion of that. So, makikita mo kung gaano karami ang gagalaw na mga activities ng COMELEC dahil dyan.
And of course, that will push back the schedule of the poll. So, is that something that the COMELEC usapan pa rin sa isang MPAC session? Energy to that, considering that petition?
Well, of course, it will have to be discussed. It will have to be discussed. But again, as I said, my reading of the commission is that this is unlikely to pass.
All right. Ito nga,
January 7 ang target po natin, and we're still on track for that.
All right. And the final candidates are all the final party districts.
Unfortunately, wala na po. Yan na po yung ating nilabas na listahan at yan na po ang susundin natin.
Okay. This petition, Senator Marcos, but the second was already cancelled. Dismissed, correct?
Has already been denied. Denied. Dismissed na po yan. So, okay. Marami na rin na-dismiss. 2-3 na ata ang na-dismiss. Yung right. Lihay-lihay, and then itong kay Tiborcio.
Alright. And of course, let's prepare on the Akbayan. Is that right? And
first time po ito at sa tingin ko sa pananaw ng division, mas makakabuti sa proseso kung marami makakita kung ano yung mga pag-uusapan. No? The division wants to have maximum transparency in this particular case so that the people will not be left questioning what happened. So, magkakaroon tayo ng live stream. Again, as you said, for the first time.
Alright. At may threat pa siguro Guanzo, para she's content when she can
Yes, yeah. Usually ang contempt, well, may contempt powers naman talaga ang COMELEC, and 48 hours is the usual period of confinement pag nako-contempt.
Okay, and syempre let's to come prepared.
Dapat best behavior, Miss Pia.
Best behavior. Dapat lang. Anyway, for now, stay tuned. People saw the same acting president needless to say she Marcos and sure. So is aimed against sa kapatid mo. So let's talk about that first. 6 cases, one, you know, in happened to all these cases against you.
Yes, of course, I've been working with the COMELEC very closely since I became a senator and the chairman of the electoral reform. So firstly, let me say that I trust in the COMELEC's fairness, and I am certain that the rule of law will prevail at the end of all that. On the other hand, let me also say that I think it is most important that we allow the will of the people to be heard. Sundan natin ang kagustuhan ng taong bayan sapagkat itong mga sinasabi nga nila, mga kaso, mga technical obstacles that are being put in the way may eventually result in an assault on the credibility of the electoral process. That would be the worst thing that could possibly happen, resulting in instability in already very anxious times.
So you are Senator Amy, if I'm not mistaken, before 2022 elections and calendar whatsoever.
Yes, as President Duterte has said repeatedly, the elections on May 9 will proceed in accordance with law and with the Constitution. And I think it must be so. Certainly, any effort to derail that schedule, which the COMELEC cannot even postpone, not even a new law can change that because it is written very clearly in our Constitution. Anything that endangers that will be in violation of the Constitution. Nabubuhay tuloy ang kung ano-anong chismis at haka-haka na may isisingit daw ng mga bagong kandidato. Eh bakit hindi naman linagay noon pa? There was such a long period, as Mr. Jimenez has stated. Why wasn't it filed at that point during the timely period? At nabubuhay tuloy ang nakakatakot na multo ng Noel or no election na ayaw natin na mangyari. Higit sa lahat, many of those on the administration side have said to me, hindi ba Marami naman ang administration candidate. We are one political family, even if there are many candidates today. And like every family, there are grudges, there are hurts, there are roiling resentments even. But instead of dragging them to COMELEC and the courts and confusing people, why is it that we just do not talk about it like a family around the kitchen table? It is a family, after all, that surrounds the president, and there are no sins that cannot be forgiven in this kind of political family. Siguro, as the Pope said in his Christmas message, it is time for dialogue, for transparency, for openness, and a generous heart.
No sins that cannot be forgiven.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Oh, you said no sins that cannot be forgiven.
Well, marami kasing nagsasabi na iba-ibang paksyon na nagkasakitan na, nagkasalitaan na ng masakit, may mga maanghang na salita na nabitawan. Wala namang problema yun, di ba? Tiisan tayong lahat. At the end of the day, we all fully support the President, his agenda, and the continuance of his exemplary projects and programs.
Senator, I mean, postpone. However, if the situation na posible pa and who are incumbent until 2025. Yung who can be the president. So it is possible.
Yes, theoretically, what would occur then is that succession law, or the laws on who will succeed the president in the event of a vacuum, will take place. And hindi na election law, kundi succession ang magte-take over dahil hindi nagkaroon ng election. This is something that we really do not want to happen, but theoretically, indeed, this could occur. And any of the senators who are able to sit until 2025 could possibly be elected as Senate President. Pero sana hindi ito mangyari. Alam na natin na napakahirap ng panahon. Meron pang Omicron ulit, na COVID na tayo, pagkatapos tinamaan pa ng Odette at sari-saring mga pinsala. This is really the time for credible and strong and united leadership. We simply cannot afford to defer the election against the Constitution.
Agreed. Elections must push through May 9, 2022. Your brother, former Senator Bongbong Marcos, has been doing very well in pre-campaign surveys. Do you think this is going to hold when the campaign, whatever form it takes, depending on the pandemic? Will this kind of survey stand still do?
Well, as I've said before, these surveys come as a complete, if pleasant, surprise to all of us. We are humbled by the extraordinary support that my brother has received. But like you said, anything can happen in an election. And certainly, this is the first national election we are conducting under pandemic conditions. Even the COMELEC, it's still a work in progress, exactly what will be done and what will be allowed, because the Omicron, for example, has become a game changer and has literally become so infectious that perhaps these campaign activities that we are so traditionally accustomed to cannot be embarked upon any longer.
And of course, everybody's hoping for a good, kahit paano. But like you said, no, from this, parang, hindi ang bayan. But I wanted to ask also, because you say performance in the survey comes at to, but what do I'm sure it's talking about this, the campaign, the Marcos Duterte campaign. Why is he do surveys? Is it because there is marami ding galit sa ganoon, people who don't want your family, your father. Is it, as one analyst has said, is it democracy fatigue? You know, pagod na ang tao sa demokrasya, which is kind of insulting also to your family. You are anti-democratic, right? Or is it a Pinoy thing na ang gusto ng tao mag-ama na presidente? So may Diosdado Macapagal, may Gloria Macapagal, or mag-ina na naging Pangulo, may Troy Aquino, may Noynoy Aquino. What is it? Why is he doing so well in surveys?
Well, I think perhaps there is some nostalgia for a simpler and more prosperous time. We've been through a hellish 20-odd months, and no one can be blamed for wishing things were better. On the other hand, I truly believe that history judges you over the long haul. And the long haul has been almost 40 years. Biglang siguro na re-realize rin natin at napapakinabangan pa rin natin lahat ang mga iba't ibang project ng tatay ko. Biglang naaalala, for example, I mean, central to the effort against COVID has really been the fight in the medical sphere. And so many of the hospitals, very simply, were set up during my dad's administration, even the RITM for infectious tropical disease, even the different lung, kidney, heart centers. Suddenly, they've become center stage, particularly the PGH, for example, where my mother was so deeply involved.
You know, Senator Amy, I can hear plenty of reactions, both good and bad, to what you're saying, but we're running out of time, so I'm going to make this as short as possible. No?
But I totally understand that. I am simply not the best judge. I am hardly, hardly detached. So I think some better political analysts should analyze what's happening exactly now. As I said time and again, this has come as a surprise to us, no matter how pleasant.
Okay, another is that people are saying talagang mamamagpag ang mga Marcos because your son Matthew in the election as governor of Ilocos Norte, Sandro Marcos, Bongbong's son, running for congressman, and both against A. Fariñas, no? So Matthew being challenged by Manong Rudy Fariñas, Sandro running against Ria Fariñas, practically knocking at the gate, Malacanang. Was it conscious effort by your family, because a lot of people think you did, no, to rebrand yourself so that you that you could get back into society, into Philippine politics?
Sa palagay ko, hindi naman talagang conscious effort or even any attempt at revisionism. I think all along, my brother and I have been working very quietly, very steadily at the different posts that we have held, whether as senator in his case, in my case, as governor, as congressman. Well, we've just been plugging along, and perhaps the time has come because it's been over 30 years, and perhaps we have more perspective, more distance, and the points of view have changed. I think it's also been a question of our failure to tell our side of the story. Not because we know better or that we want to pick a fight, but simply because the media has been so difficult in the past, we never really spoke up. And I think it's our duty to at least talk about the things that happened as we personally saw them, as we experienced them. This has been our failure, and certainly we should also tell our side of the story so that the new generations will hear a well-rounded version of history.
I can hear the reaction in social media. Senator Marcos, thank you so much for joining tonight. Hope to see you again. And thank you for being here. 2020. This is Politics as Usual. like I said, babalik Chairman, are stepping down. But sino ba yung that ano yung mga abogado, expert ba?
Well, sa ngayon wala naman tayong idea kung sinong ipapalit ng Pangulo, no? And it's always been that way. The President really doesn't tell the COMELEC kung sinong gusto nilang gawin. I suppose at some point they will probably consult with the sitting commissioners, but again, all of that ultimately nasa prerogative ng Pangulo kung sinong i-appoint niya. Kung ano ang kailangan ng komisyon, well, that's a very good question. Ano? Marami nagsasabi, kailangan namin ng mga taong merong skills sa management at siguro sa pag-organize ng mga malawakang paggalaw ng mga tao at equipment at pag-oorganisa ng isang halalan, because a lot of people don't get it, but elections are actually a massive logistical exercise. You know, you're making sure that all of the ballots are getting to the proper places and so on. So maganda kung merong ganong klaseng abilidad yung ating
of course, the spokesperson depends on
Well, sa tingin ko malabo na magkaroon pa tayo ng alternative means of voting, no? I think the ship has sailed for that. Maganda sana kung nagawa yan dati, pero again, hindi nga nagawa ng batas. So, we're going to stick with the in-person voting pa rin.
Okay, pero
No, we're not looking at multiple days for voting. In fact, voting hours are expected to be around 12 hours, no, from 6 to 6. In some cases, probably around 6 to 7 pa nga, 6 to 7 in the evening. So we will continue with the voting process indefinitely hanggang sa may tao, but we are not planning on holding 2 or 3 days of elections.
So ang kailangan na lang gawin ng tao ay ilang mga botante and to check.
Yes, and kailangan dumating sila sa polling place by around 5:45. Yan ang yung latest. Kasi pag wala ka ng around 5:45, baka hindi ka na mailista eh. And kung hindi ka mailista, hindi ka makakaboto all the way to the end.
Spokesperson. Thank you. Sure. Thank you very much.
Bang bang.
Linsky General Merchandise sa San Pedro Street, Pagadian City at bang sa balay sa mga pawaran kaniadto na maligya sa